Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting with George Galloway and the Workers' Party of Britain on what is wrong with British media. Over to you, George.
Thank you very much indeed, and to all the party members on Zoom, fraternal greetings, and to all who have not yet joined us, but I hope will do so by the end of this meeting or soon. Welcome to our regular Tuesday night meeting, public meeting, a virtual public meeting, which is attracting a great deal of interest and viewership, not just actually in this country, but around the world. So welcome to everyone. What's wrong with the British media? How long is a bit of string, and how long have you got? I'm one of those who has long followed the dictum of the Scottish writer Tom Nairn, who said, "Not until the last editor is strangled by the last copy of the British newspapers will we be truly free." I wish them no physical harm, of course, but as a metaphor, that's pretty much where I stand. Of course, the good news is no one needs to strangle the British newspapers these days because they have well and truly hanged themselves, a subject to which I shall return. But let me enter a couple of caveats before I proceed. The first is that in 1945, when there was only one television station and one radio station, and every single newspaper, with the exception of the Daily Worker and the Daily Herald, which had decent circulations, but nothing like the plethora of their opposition, Clement Attlee dumped the great war leader Winston Churchill on his well-upholstered backside, despite the unremitting hostility of the vast majority of the British media. And yet Labour won a landslide. Churchill, the hero of 10,000 newsreels over the preceding 6 years, 5 years at least, and who had personified the country's struggle against Hitlerism and fascism, which reached its apogee, of course, this week in 1945, 75 years ago, and we'll be celebrating Victory Day on Saturday, May the 9th, online, and you're all invited back for that. The hero of 10,000 newsreels was unceremoniously booted out of power. Now, admittedly, the Left Book Club, again to which I shall return, the Left Book Club in the 30s and throughout the war had seeded the ground for a new and decisive turn in British politics and British society. Admittedly, cells of leftists and communists, socialists, had been active in the armed forces throughout the war, but the real overwhelming reason why Labour under Attlee, with a programme that makes Jeremy Corbyn's programme for government look positively Fabian, was that the British people had, in their own minds, made a decisive turn, and they were not to be dissuaded by the talk of Gestapo and all the other foul electioneering of Churchill and the Conservatives and the right-wing press at that time. So the point I'm trying to make is that one must never be fatalistic about the political situation. One must never look at the sea of hostility in the media and imagine that it is unvanquishable, especially now when we have many, many more tools at our disposal than people did in 1945. To a lesser extent, in every regard, Harold Wilson won 2 general elections in 1974 at a time when the security services were literally breaking into his residences, were bugging and burgling him all over London, and where even the publisher of the Daily Mirror was involved with Lord Mountbatten and other grandees in actual plots to stage a military coup against him and overthrow him and put the Prime Minister in prison. But Harold Wilson won not 1 but 2 general elections in February and October of 1974. This time, no Daily Herald. The Daily Herald had become the Sun, if you can imagine it. No Daily Worker, only the Morning Star, which was a dim star indeed compared to the Daily Worker of 1945. That's important, I think, to grasp. And thirdly, at a time when there was 2 television stations and not much more than 2 radio stations, and where there was no Daily Mirror on the side of on his side, Tony Benn became the most popular political leader in the country, and in my view, the most popular political leader of the left that we have ever had in this country. I'm in a position to know because I was by his side, at his right hand, as he traveled the length and breadth of the country in the early 1980s, Mr. Benn in the teeth of literally total, absolutely total media hostility, which would regularly tell us that he was actually literally mad, that he had driven himself mad by drinking too much tea, and that his ancestors were mad, and it must have genetically transferred down to him at a time when his fellow cabinet members and shadow cabinet members were telling anyone who listened that he was mad or bad or both, and quite possibly a Soviet agent to boot. Mr. Benn built a mass following of millions of people in Britain. And you may have heard me tell you before of my travels with him. One in particular in the obituary I recorded for him is worth referring to in this regard. Having said all of that, it's undoubtedly true that the proliferation of television and radio stations and the maintenance of a virtually universal hostile newspaper media has undoubtedly gotten worse. And there's no question that the media played an important role, facilitated, of course, by the enemy within his own party, unaccountably including people that he had kept close to him and even promoted. People like Keir Starmer, for example, played an important role, though I argue not the most important role, in the defenestration of Jeremy Corbyn. The Julian Assange case is another case in point, where the mass media has turned on Julian Assange in a Pavlovian way, and may very well succeed in hunting him either to an early, untimely death in Belmarsh prison or to a living death in the dungeons of the United States. The very day that we're in is further example. The BBC, the state broadcaster, had not, at least by 5 p.m. today, reported on any of their portals that Britain had just become the second worst coronavirus black spot in the entire world, had overtaken, and we're always told we're 2 weeks behind Italy, had overtaken Italy for the greatest number of deaths. And if you follow the FT, which I do religiously, you'll see today that their prediction, based on their numerology, which I think is much more dependable, either than the ONS or the NHS, and still more the British government spokespeople themselves, our death toll has reached 55,000. In other words, not that far short of the United States figure, though they have many times the multiple of our population. And at least until 5 p.m., I don't know if they have now done so, but they completely ignored this rather salient fact, preferring to show us snaps of the Prime Minister out for a walk in St. James's Park and other such ephemera. Now, the British media, therefore, has always been hostile to socialism, but has not always prevailed in defeating socialist ideas, in defeating in elections parties to which they were entirely hostile. And so this, I think, is the framework of tonight's discussion. I'm going to say, it's a bold prediction, but I'm going to say that the British newspaper market will not recover from its current travails. The Sun, which was formerly the Daily Herald and then absolutely the brightest planet in the newspaper firmament by a very long way, selling at 1.5, maybe 6 million copies a day, is now just over 1 million copies a day, and this year lost 64 million pounds. And it's true that Rupert Murdoch has ink on his fingers and doesn't like to relinquish newspapers, although he proved in the News of the World case that he sometimes knows when the game is up. It's my prediction that the Sun will be sacrificed, and if I were working at the Sun, and if Tom Newton Dunn is watching now, I'd definitely be at least tentatively looking around for a new job. In fact, the Times will become the new Sun, the new flagship, and Times Radio, formerly Talk Radio, or at least utilizing some of the resources of Talk Radio, will become Murdoch's main flagship in the media market. But all of the other papers. Some people ask me, why does the Daily Express keep showcasing my television work? Why is the Daily Express of all the newspapers continually running my videos? And the reason is, my videos are the only ones that get anyone to look at the Daily Express. Almost literally, that is the long and the short of it. The people who watch my videos on the Daily Express portal absolutely dwarf the people who are working for the Daily Express. The newspaper market is shot through. And so Tom Nairn's dearest wish of the strangling of the last editor with the last copy is pretty much upon us. And if I live a normal lifespan, I expect the time to come that I will go into petrol stations and supermarkets and newsagents, if there are any of those left, and see no newspapers at all on the shelves. So I'm not going to waste a lot of time talking about them, because television and radio are far, far more important. Of course, the enemy television and radio stations use the popular prejudices paraded every day in the newspapers as the basis for their broadcasting. That's true, right from late at night when Sky reviews the next day's newspapers. I can tell you, as someone who formerly worked in the field, that when you come in to, not my shows, because I don't, but all the other presenters have a pile of newspapers on their desk because they are stuck for words often, and they find those words, they find the stories that are of importance to them and to the audience in the newspaper. So that will have to change. But television and radio are the future. And again, there's good news here. Because the reason why it took to the 1970s before there was a second TV station, and into the 1980s before there was a third TV station, and into this century before there was this plethora of television stations, is that the cost of entry was very, very high. You needed to own a lot of hardware, and then later a lot of money for satellite time in order to have a TV station. But all of that, as this broadcast proves, I'm broadcasting to you for free, and you are watching me for free, and you can interact with me for free. So actually the cost of entry has not just fallen, it has effectively disappeared. Now, just before you join me, until seconds before you join me, I was paying Sky some more money, not that much more, to get an even better, faster internet speed. And of course, there's still a way to travel before the quality of these pictures will be as good, the quality of the audio will be as good as you're used to on terrestrial, on satellite television. We are well down the road towards a time when that will be true. And that means we have our own television stations. We have our own radio stations. Oh, wait, I already do. The greatest thing that ever happened to me was being sacked by talk radio, because I have gone from an audience of some 30,000, 30 on talk radio, to an audience of in excess of 500,000 every Sunday with the mother of all talk shows, and famously on one occasion 1.17 million viewers, never mind the listeners who are listening on radio, FM in Washington, D.C., AM across America, or online on SputnikNews.com. And I'm better paid, and I'm absolutely free, and there's no Ofcom to interfere in my output. Only decency and ethics police my output on the mother of all talk shows. And other people are now catching on. So 1,000 flowers will bloom in this garden. And therefore, we need to turn our attention to the quality of the output. Because you know the song, 300 channels and nothing on. Well, we must make sure that in this new era, that's not true of us as it was true of them. So our graphics have to be tip-top, our camera work, our microphones have to be tip-top, our marketing of our product has to be tip-top, but all of these things are as nothing if somebody comes on and reads in a monotone voice out of the London telephone directory, if such a directory still exists. It's got to be good content if you're going to grab the audience, keep them coming back, and grow the audience. And that means applying the creative spirit that is within all of us to this new challenge. And already we're seeing that in microcosm in our work elsewhere on social media. My followers, well over 1 million followers on social media. It's not every post is as good as the one before it, of course. Not every video is as good as it could or should be, but by and large, I'm keeping my audience growing and growing on social media because the content is good. It is not a prolix recitation of ideological perspectives. It is not an unending, ceaseless parade of dead Russians or Germans, though there's a place, of course, for parading. And on this day, we celebrate the birthday of the greatest of them all, the greatest German of them all, the greatest philosopher of them all, the greatest, the father of socialism, Karl Marx, whose birthday is today. But you'll never build a big audience reading from Das Kapital, although I see one of our members is doing a daily Mao. I must tune into that. It might be fun, but it can't be the whole content. So that's why some of you may be surprised. I intersperse my output with a picture of my kids playing football, or my wife at the hospital today for her midwife's appointment. I drop in my affection for Bob Dylan, or I circulate some wonderful goals scored mainly by Manchester United and Celtic, but not only them. I'm quite Catholic about that as other things. And I talk about today's politics, but I also talk about 75 years ago politics. I talk about 300 years ago politics. I try, in other words, light and shade to keep the viewers' attention and to keep the viewers coming back. And that's what our output has to be. It has to be human in scale. Human interest is a thing that will never wane, thank God, or we would cease to be human. We care that somebody's sister died. We ache that somebody's husband is in a coma. We send each other greetings and goodwill and so on. These are all human things which will make a very big difference. And I expect, again, if God spares me, I expect that the 1.17 million audience for the mother of all talk shows will one day, perhaps not that distant, become the norm. And now I want to put that in perspective for you. 1.17 million is a bigger audience than any political broadcast on the so-called mainstream British media. It's bigger than Marr, it's bigger than Peston, it's bigger than Andrew Neil, it's bigger than Channel 4 News, and so on. It's important that, because some of you may think, you know, I'm operating at the periphery, operating at the edges, because some people say to me, I wish we could get you more often onto Marr or onto Channel 4 News. Why? I'm reaching more people without being on these channels. So I suppose in that sense, I'm trying to encourage you that we are by no means outlaws on the periphery, that only the peripheral people are paying attention to. Of course, we're a long way from the audience of Love Island. They say that every cloud has a silver lining, and I see that they have just cancelled the season of Love Island. We have not yet grabbed the attention of the mass of the British people, but we have grabbed the attention of the avant-garde, if you like, the advance guard, or the most politically conscious, the most politically interested people in the land. That's why our numbers are so good. And that's not any mean achievement, as we're hated by the establishment, we're hated by New Labour, we're hated by the official trade unions, we're hated by the Liberals, we're hated by the FBPE lunatics, we're hated by the Trotskyists, we're hated by the anarchists, we're hated by the David Ickists, and yet, here we are, with our fixed political position, ironclad, unwavering, immovable, absolutely determined, and we have the audience that none of these other people have. And we must make good use of it. So as I've said to you before, be smart on social media. I see some of our people not being smart. I don't reprimand them in public, and so I won't single them out now, as some of the public are watching. But please don't get drawn into interminable, long polemics with people from whom it's really obvious at a glance, at least at a glance from me, that these people are not people that can be persuaded, not people that can be won over, and they are wasting your time in drawing into an interminable argument. It's quite easy, if you apply your mind to it, to know whether someone is genuinely unknowing and with a little bit of presentation of factual material or reference to other sources and so on can be neutralized or won. It's quite easy to differentiate between such people and the people that I see some of you arguing with. And although I fall foul of this myself from time to time, please don't swear when you've got the Workers' Party logo on your social media. Please make no unseemly or obscene references and so on, because it reflects badly on us. And it reflects badly on me, because I'm not reprimanding you there and then. Be smart on social media and put your minds to how you can improve your content. You see, in 25 seconds, that's all, with just a telephone, I put out a video for this meeting tonight. It took me 25 seconds. In fact, 25 seconds is a good length, especially for Instagram. All of you can make those videos. I saw one of our comrades, Georgie. I'm not sure where she is. I hope she's watching tonight. She was just walking through our garden, being a normal woman and talking normally, absolutely sanely, about socialism and about the Workers' Party. And it was a thing of beauty. Now, you can all do that. All of you can do it. The more very short, good videos that you can make, good graphics that you can make. Our Grimsby boys, our Charlie and Danny are just masterful at this. If I were to win the lottery, I'd employ them full time and pay them a wage to do it. And graphics, pictures, moving pictures, video, audio, that's the way forward. Of course, there'll always be a place for the pronunciamento. I do a fair bit of it myself. Try not to put too many capital letters in and too many exclamation marks either. In other words, think smart, be smart, practice. And the better our output is, the more people we will attract. Now, of course, the mainstream media will go on, although advertising revenues in the independent sector are catastrophic and about to get more catastrophic still, but they'll still manage to go on, and they'll squeeze some politics and some news into their schedules, even though they are money losers. They're loss leaders, actually, to persuade the state to keep on giving them what was in the past a license to print money. But the radio stations and the television stations are losing audience. We are the ones who are gaining audience. And I think that that is going to continue. So shorter than normal, because I want the maximum number of contributions on this. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I'm all yours.
Thanks, George. I think that was a fantastic opening to the meeting and a lot of great points over there. And we've had some really good and interesting questions about the mainstream media, social media in general. So one question coming from Bill F. He wants to know, the British media is a microcosm of all that is wrong with British society. Entrenched classism, prevalence of an old school tie network and embittered middle class snobbery and belittling of the working class. Moreover, people do not even receive the benefit of receiving trusted information on which to base decisions. How will this be overcome in the 21st century in a way that will benefit the ordinary worker and ensure meritocracy prevails?
Well, for example, a poll was recently taken which showed the various parts of the four estates which were trusted by people in relation to the coronavirus. And by a very large distance indeed, broadcast and print journalists came at the bottom of the pile. Something like 17% of those polled trusted the newspaper and broadcast media for information. These are catastrophically low levels. The journalists themselves were shocked by this poll. I saw one of them, Ian Dale, on LBC, say that he would have to pause and reflect to find himself a member of such a widely despised professional group. Some of them affected not to know how it is that they became so despised. I believe that the turning point on this, as on much else in our political realm here in this country and to an extent in the United States, was the Iraq War. I said at the time after the Iraq War that nothing would ever be the same again, and I'm saying it now after the coronavirus, that will be true even more. And so those of us who have taken a consistent line, a logical and reasonable line, by reasonable I mean staying on the side of reason and thought and science and fact, instead of departing to the four winds, chasing moonbeams of conspiracy theories and the rest, will get the reward for that. It takes a long time to become a trusted source. It takes a long time and a consistent track record before people more or less automatically trust you. I have some attributes that God gave me and others that I've learned over a very long life. But the most important attribute I have, and it's reflected in my postbag, it's reflected on the call-ins to my shows and so on, is that people believe that I'm honest. They don't believe that I'm saying something in which I don't believe. They don't believe I'm saying something because somebody paid me to do it or because I'm afraid to say otherwise. So I may be right, I may be wrong on something, but people trust the fact that I'm telling you what I genuinely think. And it takes a long time to build that reputation, but it takes no time at all to lose such a reputation. And I think the British media has comprehensively and for all time lost any reputation that they had. As a matter of fact, their reputation was ill-deserved. I was brought up in a house that thought the sun shone out of the BBC's arse. I was not even allowed to watch ITV. I have not until this day ever seen an episode of Coronation Street. If my parents caught us watching ITV, they switched it over immediately. Now, that was ill-deserved, actually, because the BBC has always been, since its foundation as a strike-breaking tool in the general strike in 1926, has always been a tool of the establishment, but somehow it built a reputation. But it's lost it now completely. Well done, Laura Kuenssberg and co. And it will never get it back again. So the questioner asks, what can we do? Well, I've spent a lot of time tonight saying what we can do. We must do it ourselves. We can never expect a fair crack of the whip from the enemy. Why should we? Why should they give us a fair crack of the whip? If you think about it, it's only their hypocrisy that even made them pretend to do so. Because we mean it. The Workers' Party of Britain really means it. If we can, we will take away your power and a very great deal of your wealth. And we will absolutely change the role that you have made our country play in the world. Why should they help us with that? If you think about it, we have to do it ourselves.
Thanks, George. And the next question comes from George Dragon. Go ahead, George.
Georgie, well done.
You're right, George. How's it going?
Good,
yeah.
mate.
So basically, obviously, we have a very, very wide reach when it comes to Twitter, when it comes to Moats, when it comes to RT, you know, all the different channels we have. But obviously, with those channels, it's mostly kind of the left-wing, socialist, progressive sort of circles we're reaching. So do you think a bit of a push into the more mainstream channels like, you know, Good Morning Britain and things like that would actually help us to reach those who aren't really following the political sphere like we do?
Well, if Piers Morgan calls me, and he does from time to time, to go on Good Morning Britain, of course, I jump at the chance because it has a considerable audience. Jeremy Vine is the only other person in the mainstream media that occasionally brings me on his Radio 2 show, the Jeremy Vine show, and of course I always take it up. But these are the only two. It's been years since I've been on BBC News, years since I've been on Sky News, years since I've been on Question Time, and I'm not expecting that to change. But I must correct you, Georgie, on something. As the results of our polls on Moats show, it is not at all the case that everyone watching and listening is on the left or is a socialist, is a convert. Not at all. In fact, if I was to extrapolate from the polls that we run, about half of the people watching and listening are not. Now, that must be true in the United States, even more than it might be true in Britain. But it is the case that I have a following of people who want to hear what I've got to say for the reasons I explained earlier, even if they don't agree with it. And when they do agree with it, they frequently opine, I never thought I'd agree with Galloway, but if I had £1 for every person that has said that in my life over the last 20 years or so especially, I'd be exceedingly rich indeed. We, as I said at the opening meeting of the Workers' Party, we don't write off anyone. We don't write someone off because of incorrectness in their language. We don't write someone off because they may have voted a certain way in the past. We pursue with good faith anyone who will listen to us to try to win them. It's one of the reasons why I get exasperated. I got pretty exasperated against someone that has been following me a long time and whom I muted earlier today. And she'll be upset about it, and I'm a bit upset about it, but I believe I was rich. I was absolutely, it was richly deserved, because it is the feeling still amongst some that our purpose in the Workers' Party is to collect the 57 varieties of leftist that exists in this country and bring them into one fold. Well, I can't speak for all of the leaders of the Workers' Party, and there's been no formal discussion about this point, but I honestly could think of nothing more nightmarish, nothing more hellish than gathering in one place the 57 varieties of lefties that exist in this country. I'm actually, if I'm being perfectly honest, and while no one's listening or watching, I couldn't care less for most pre-existing lefties. I want to go after the working class. I want to win the working class, which would never describe themselves as lefty. In fact, such a dirty word has left become, they would run a mile from the idea that they are leftists. I don't even like to use the word leftist anymore. I'm a socialist. I believe in a socialist future. But above all, I believe in the working class. And so I don't ask the bus drivers if they're leftists or if they're socialists before I join with them in the battle for PPE in the current crisis. I saw our post day today, a woman, postal worker, going around pushing her trolley, no mask, no gloves, going from house to house, handling paper on which the virus could very well be lying, with absolutely no PPE of any kind. I'm with her, whatever her political views. She may be exceedingly unsound, for all I know, on, I don't know, sexual politics, racial politics, gender politics. She may be. That's not important to me. I'll deal with that later, further down the line. It's my job to persuade her that she can come with us. She can combine with us. She can be a part of us. And she'll be stronger for it if she is. Sorry, that went on too long. Beg your pardon.
It's fantastic, George. Yeah, fantastic points. We have a really interesting question from Matthew Burrows. So when you're ready, Matthew, fire away.
Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, great.
Yes.
Hi, George. What it is, I mean, back in the 60s, there was a way for the working class people to get into acting or directing things. For instance, like I know for a fact that John Hurt and Ian McShane got like a bursary to go to so that they could study. Now all that seems closed off. I've nothing against Benedict Cumberbatch. I think he's a fine actor. I've nothing against Tom Hardy, but they're public school boys. And the fact is, all this seems to be closed off. We haven't got any Lindsay Andersons. We haven't got any Ken Loaches. We've still got Ken Loach, but where is the next wave of these people who should be going into the arts? Chris Eccleston's raised this point. There are no working class actors getting into acting and becoming stars anymore. And I think it's a disgrace. You know, I'm just wondering what you thought about that.
Well, my first point is I'm exceedingly disappointed to learn that Tom Hardy is a public school boy, because I absolutely love him as an actor, as a film star. In fact, I'm watching him on Taboo on the television late tonight. So the point that you make is abundantly clear. We've still got Ken Loach, but he's no spring chicken. And his best years of filmmaking are behind him. So we need more Ken Loaches. And I feel sure that this artistic wave inside the working class has by no means ended. We have one very close to us, Chris McGlade, who took the West End by storm just before the coronavirus was about to break into Hollywood. Hope that hasn't gone away when the virus does. And, you know, people who think like us are many. There are many millions, and there are children not yet in the political sphere are no doubt thinking artistically. We've got Alex Wilmot, we've got Guy, who I hope are both watching now. Maybe you and they should get together and produce a paper for us, just charting the spaces that have disappeared the opportunities that are no longer there. And that will help us put together an arts policy, and that would be a good thing, I think.
Thanks, George. And we have a couple of questions written in here from Mark Adkins. Why do the media only ever interview parents and children that are keen for schools to reopen? Capitalism seems to have made enjoying spending time with your children taboo.
Very good point. There's clearly been a turn amongst the ruling elite, the establishment, business, to force the working class into potentially fatal workplaces in order to save what's left of capitalism. Because we exist to defend the workers, we resist this. And we make no apology for it. It's not our job to save capitalism. If Richard Branson cannot stand on his own 2 feet, then he must fall. And the state may well then pick up the pieces and to some extent will do. So we stand against this drive, which is clearly on to stampede our people back to work, back to school, before it's safe to do so. And we will not waver from that. Of course, we demand the financial wherewithal to allow our people to stay at home. And there has been some success in that. 80% of your wage up to $2,500 a month is paid by the state is not a small thing. And it was fear of the response of the working class which made the Tories do that. It should be 100% of your wages. We will not tire of pointing that out, but we will not waver. And now Italy and Spain have now gone back to work. They're a couple of weeks in terms of the curve of the whole thing ahead of us. I'd be very surprised indeed if there's not another massive spike in infection and death in Italy and Spain. And so I will not support a return to the front by the mass of the workers, whilst there's still such a danger to their health and even to their life, as well as, of course, continuing to demand the full PPE for those key workers, critical workers who must work, but who are so powerlessly protected at this point in time.
Thanks, George. And a question coming from Gavin Hawkton. There is so much disinformation and hegemonic narratives within our media that distort the case for socialism. How can the Workers' Party cut through the noise and reach out to the wider public? How important is social media on this point?
Oh, totally, crucially, and just argue for good things. You don't need to wrap it up in isms. You don't need to wrap it up in ideological language. Just propose things which would be good for the people, and the people can be persuaded of it. And we are already a long way down the road on that. The numbers of people in Britain supporting the renationalization of the utilities that were stolen from us is enormous. The demand for the renationalization of the railways is even bigger than for the renationalization of the utilities. And here I come to a USP of ours. Everybody else, Labour, are demanding the defense of the National Health Service. We're different. We demand the renationalization of the National Health Service. We do not pretend that the National Health Service we have today is wonderful We think it's wonderful, minus all the underfunding and privatization that has gone on to date. We, unlike Labour, don't pretend that this problem began with David Cameron in 2010. So every time you hear someone mention that the Tories and austerity have gutted the NHS, point out that it's 40 years, not 10 years, of privatization, PFIs, underfunding, and the systematic perversion of the idea of a national health service, which is personified in Stuart Stephen, the US private healthcare boss, who's now in charge of our National Health Service. So we are not defending the status quo in the National Health Service. We're demanding a return to the status quo ante, which existed before that 40 years of privatization, part and full, of the National Health Service. But our position and the position of Labour to defend the NHS, well, who doesn't support that? That's why I was interviewed earlier about the trade talks with the United States. Some people still say, you know, the Tories will try and bring the Yanks openly into the NHS. They will not do so. They cannot afford the risk of doing so. In any case, they're already salami style, slice by slice, doing quite well on that. And they've intensified their efforts in that regard during the period of the coronavirus, imagine. But they will not openly, full-frontally bring in the Americans to run our health service. Neither will they openly say that they want to privatize it. Better to do it by stealth. Ideas like the right to dignity for our old people have been enormously strengthened by recent events. That thousands of our old people should be stuck in what are effectively granny farms, where they are not just there waiting to die, but are actually being killed by the failure of these places to protect them, and the big failure of the NHS throwing people out of hospital into these homes. That will be another very fruitful front for us that we intend fully to develop our ideas on this. We want to recover the idea that the state should help families to keep their elderly with them. Of course, it's not possible in every case. Some elderly don't have families. Some elderly are simply unmanageable at home with their families. But a large number of our elderly should have had no need to be put in these places in the first place. One of the extents to which Eastern societies are superior to Western societies in the respect that they give to their elders, and the fact that they would never, I mean, it would literally, my wife is from Indonesia, as people will know. It is literally incomprehensible to an Indonesian family that their parent would be put off into a home to live out the last days of their life. This kind of argument will become a much more salient in the future. So I believe that socialist ideas are popular ideas because they are rational ideas. I know it's a bit trite, but I may have heard Mr. Ben say this 1,000 times. I could even mimic his voice in saying it. There's 12 of us adrift on a lifeboat. There's limited food, there's limited water. How do we distribute the limited food and water on board our 12-person lifeboat? We can sell it, and only the rich will eat and drink. We can fight for it, and only the strong will eat and drink. Or we can distribute it fairly, according to need, amongst each other. That, Mr. Ben used to say, is socialism. Socialism. It's trite, but it's good.
Fantastic quote, I think. And people can go back to the Workers' Party launch videos on the Workers' Party Britain YouTube channel to see our opening rally with Dr. Bob Gill, who does a fantastic job, especially in his new documentary, The Great NHS Heist, of going over everything that is happening to the NHS and everything that has happened to the NHS. It's a very eye-opening watch, so people should definitely go back and watch that when they get a chance. And we have a question from Georgina Harrison.
Oh, that's me.
Ah,
Hello.
Georgie, it's you.
Hi, can you hear me, George?
Very clearly, thank you.
Excellent. Thanks for plugging my video earlier. I'm famous now, aren't I? Enjoying the meeting a lot. I just wanted to ask, when there's a plethora, to use your word, of lots of socialist stroke left-wingy type publications out there, and I get what you're saying about using media and social media instead, but I would love it if we had a paper that I could sort of gently display in the ward and sort of get rid of their Suns and their Daily Expresses and Daily Mails and say, oh, have a look at this, dear, it's got such and such an item in it. So really, and also with people like myself that I'm not really up on learning about imperialism and all the other bits and bobs, just ordinary workers, they might be sort of put off from something, say, like the Morning Star, and certainly would be put off by the Daily Star. Have you got any sort of suggestions of maybe having our own newspaper, but like a decent one, if that makes any sense?
Unfortunately, I couldn't recommend any newspaper, and I'm not a fan of newspapers, though there are others in the leadership of the Workers' Party who do like to get their hands dirty on the printing press, and they do like the feel of paper more than I do. So you're pushing at an open door with them. I think when it's possible to do so, the British Worker will be available. It won't be a newspaper in the sense that, you know, the Socialist Worker or that kind of stuff will be. It'll be smaller and shorter, and it will not cost as much, won't cost anything at all, I think. And I'm sure that we will do that. My days of newspaper selling are definitely over. I'll stick to the TV and radio, but I take your point very much, Georgie.
Fantastic, thanks, George. And question from Gavin Dobson. Go ahead, Gavin.
Hi, George.
Hi, Gavin.
Hi, George. How you doing? You all right?
Yes, good, thanks.
Good, good. Got a good question for you. It's a bit similar to George's, actually. With the likes of the newspapers like Daily Mail, The Sun, they all seem to follow their agenda, i.e. follow the political parties of the Conservatives. Daily Mirror, Guardian, sort of more liberal, Labour Party, that's what they kind of follow. When do you think we'll have an independent, free press that is free from political bias, is my question to you, George?
Well, never, because if you think about it, who would go to the trouble, especially when it isn't even profitable, to produce a newspaper if it were not for reasons of proselytizing for their own political bias? There would be no other reason to do it. If we started a newspaper, it would be a newspaper reflecting our political bias. So there's no point in wishing for an unbiased press. There never has been. But what there has been, are wolves in sheep's clothing. Now, you mentioned the very worst of them. The Guardian is utter poison. much more poisonous than the Daily Mail, because the Daily Mail is not pretending to be a sheep whilst being a wolf. The Guardian is a wolf pretending to be a sheep. So I read online the Daily Mail all day. I go back to it probably hourly because it has a lot of journalists, a lot of photographers, a lot of staff. This I know, I used to write a column in it for many years. And so I know where they're coming from politically, so I'm able to sift the politics from the news. I'm able to understand why the paper, with its political line, is approaching this subject in this way. Whereas with The Guardian, of course, the supposition of most readers is that this is a progressive paper. It is a poisonous, rancorous, treacherous, utterly reprehensible rag. No one should ever buy it. No one should ever retweet it. If you have to, just like the story which includes it. It is the worst of all the newspapers in Britain, including the Daily Star, by a long, long way.
Thanks, George. And we have a couple of writing questions. One from Mara. Do you think the bias in British media is of a corporate nature, innate to the financial interests and the nature of neoliberalism? Or do you think it's a more corroborated campaign coming from the government with the specific goal of directing public opinion in one specific direction? Do you think the media is directly controlled by the government, as their unity of opinion on war and international policy in general might suggest?
No, I don't believe the media is directly controlled by the government. And I mentioned the Daily Mail earlier. The Daily Mail is currently the most trenchant critic of the government's handling of the coronavirus by a long chalk, by a country mile. And that's partly because Piers Morgan writes for them, but it's also in the timber, in the bones of the editorial line. It's partly because the Mail represents a lot of people at risk. It's bought by, its customers are older people, and many of them feel that they have been let down, that their interests have not been protected by the government, and the Mail has always been very much in tune with its readers. It's in that sense quite reader-led. It's historically known, for example, as a woman's paper. It has a very much higher percentage of women readers than any other newspaper, and that's reflected in the choice of stories that they cover and the way in which they treat those stories. No, I don't believe the government controls the press. I believe that the government and the press just all face in the same direction, fundamentally. They all face the direction of free market economics. They all face the direction of American hegemony in foreign policy. In neoliberal economics, neocon foreign policy is their instinctive stance. Now, I speak of the owners and, of course, the government. But what Mara's question does raise is an interesting and unfathomable fact. The people who work, the hirelings who work for these proprietors, are oftentimes people from the lower middle class, upper working class, some of them industrial working class, blue collar working class, children, sons and daughters, who go into working for these institutions and grow up in the ugliest possible way to be basically shooting a breeze in which they have themselves no interest. Journalists today have never had a more precarious professional position. Never. Journalists are on short-term contracts, almost all of them. They are increasingly hanging on to their positions for grim life, grim death, however you say it. They are, any week they could come in and get their notice, get their jotters. They are treated increasingly like they were already artificial intelligence, which many of their jobs will soon be done by. That's a more philosophical question. I'm not qualified to answer it, but I'm bound to tell you that I have never known a time where journalists as a group were more reprehensible than the journalistic cohort today. There was always, and I've been in politics 50 years, there was always on every paper 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 people that were sympathetic to our political positions, even if their title was extremely hostile to it. And one could always get heads up rather, from them. Something's coming in the morning. Even the Daily Telegraph assault on me that cost them £2.3 million in damages and costs. I knew about this attack before it happened, because even in the Daily Telegraph there were people who were sympathetic to us, who gave us a heads up about it. So that's not true anymore. That's really not true anymore. I can think literally of no one at all in the Guardian, in the Daily Mirror, in the Daily Mail, or any paper. I could think of no one working in the BBC or in Channel 4 News that has any sympathy whatsoever for the causes that we stand for. And that is a new thing. And it's a paradox, because the more they do the bidding of their masters, the sharper their masters are making the very knives that will soon sever their connection to these individuals. It's lemming-like suicide behavior, but that's what they are doing. I've never known a worse time for written and broadcast journalism in this country, ever.
Fantastic. Thank you, George. Lots of good feedback from the members in the chat. Everyone's enjoying the meeting, and our viewing figures have been going up over the evening as well. So it's drawing in a lot of people. So we're actually creating the new media here, I think, which is great. Nadia, a question from Nadia. You're able to go ahead?
Hello, George Galloway. You're my childhood hero, so I'm quite nervous. Just a question to you. From turning an anti-racist like Corbyn to an anti-Semite and a racist via their relentlessness, via the Panorama documentary and news packages, how can the Workers' Party fight against this, and what does the future hold for the BBC? Sorry, it's my baby in the background.
You may not know this, but our party has a higher proportion of husbands and wives and children of any political organization I have ever known. So we encourage children crying in the background. My own are listening to this now, and quite quietly. So never feel shy about that, about bringing your children to our events. They're always welcome. And we like couples to be involved as couples too, because that's the kind of society we want to build, and therefore our party should act and be like the society we want to build. Well, of course, your question was predicated on the word fight. You said, how can the Workers' Party fight against that? Well, that's the operative word, you see. You have to fight. And Jeremy Corbyn did not fight. He never once fought against the notion that he, his friends, his ideology was anti-Semitic. He never once did what I did over and over again on Sky News, on talk radio. He never once went on the offensive and said, how dare you call me an anti-Semite because I oppose the stealing of Palestinian land, the massacre of Palestinian children, the racist apartheid nature of the state of Israel. He never did any of that. In fact, he made it illegal to say those words that I have just said. He made it an expellable offense to say the things that he'd been saying for 30 years or more prior to becoming leader of the Labour Party. So the first thing, Nadia, that you have to do is fight. And you have to fight persuasively. If you run away, in Glasgow we say, if you don't run, they can't chase you. And if you run, they will chase you. And they'll chase you until you have no fight left and fall upon you and devour you. And that's exactly what they did to Jeremy Corbyn. Far from defending himself, far from fighting, he threw one after the other his own friends, starting with me, under the bus, rather than fight the fake, false, entirely constructed charge of anti-Semitism against him. Not because anti-Semitism is not a thing. Matter of fact, I'm here to tell you, it's more of a thing than most of you actually yet know. I've studied this very, very closely, and I'm in a good position to. Anti-Semitism on the left is a thing. It's not the same as the anti-Semitism on the right. It's a morphing of anti-capitalist, anti-finance capital, anti-Israel feelings, which in some people comes out of their mouths, from their brains, in anti-Semitic thought and speech. Not expressed in the way that the Hitlerites did, but nonetheless anti-Semitic. When I read someone say, hear someone say, Rothschild, I immediately reach for the dial because this almost always displays that the person using it has disappeared down that rabbit hole of conspiracy theories and hunting for cults and Illuminati and New World Order. And a lot of it is code for Jews. So anti-Semitism is a thing. I myself think Corbyn was slow to conclude that point. I would myself have dealt with the examples of anti-Semitism that were truly anti-Semitism much more quickly and much more ruthlessly than he did. But the truth is that the campaign against Corbyn was not about anti-Semitism, what was about defending Israel. The Board of Deputies' number one priority is defending Israel. And the Israel lobby in this country, is the clue being in the name, has as its first priority the protection of Israel. And that's why they went after Jeremy Corbyn, and he did not fight it, to use your word, Nadia. So the first thing we'd do is fight it. The second thing we'd do is make sure that we never, wittingly or unwittingly, fall into the trap of endorsing, retweeting, liking ideas and imagery which is, in essence, anti-Semitic. The third thing we do is establish in the mind of the fair-minded listener that actually the best solution in the Israel-Palestine conflict is for one state called Israel-Palestine, or Palestine-Israel, with a hyphen, in which every Jew, Muslim, Christian lives as an equal citizen under the law. One man, one woman, one vote. Just like we fought for in South Africa, is what we should be fighting for in Israel, Palestine. If we can persuade the fair-minded listener that that's actually the only equitable way in which this crisis, this century-old conflict, can be brought under control and brought towards resolution, that's the only way to do it. Thanks, Nadia.
Thanks, George. And we have a question from Fran. Go ahead, Fran.
You're right. I just wondered what you thought about like the right wing, like Trump sort of switching this media thing like on its head, and he like claims that fake news is written by the establishment against him. Do you get what I'm saying? They're like,
yeah. I think he's done.
Go on, you go on.
I think he's done a really good job on that. I wish Corbyn had done that. I wish Corbyn had treated the media that were destroying him in the way that Trump has treated the media that is seeking to destroy him. Because Trump is right. They are fake news. CNN exists only to destroy Donald Trump. Now, we're against both of them. We're against Trump and we're against Biden. We're not for Biden because he's not Trump. We're against both of them. And we think that if you follow the line of the lesser of two evils, all you're doing is guaranteeing that evil will continue to win. And that next time around, it'll be an even worse choice between the two evils. So I'm fully supporting and hope he will run. Governor Jesse Ventura, former governor of Minnesota, I hope he runs. I hope he runs as the Green Party candidate, but if not, I hope he runs as an independent third-party candidate. I'm against them all, but that's not going to put me on the side of CNN or MSNBC because I hate Donald Trump. They are lie machines, absolute lie machines, even worse than we've got here. And their hypocrisy is, of course, demonstrated by the support which overwhelmingly the US media does, the support of Joe Biden with all the baggage that he is carrying, increasingly, falteringly.
Thanks, George. And the next question comes from Jamie McNeil. Go ahead, Jamie.
Good evening, George. Just a quick query, really. You may have answered this already. I was a little bit late to the meeting. Given the quite successful campaign by the group led by donkeys that use billboards, do you believe that could be a viable option to transmit the Workers' Party message across the next 2 years?
Billboards?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in billboards, but they are extremely expensive. Although what I do think would be good if our people at the center could begin slowly to develop an inventory of small business people that support us. And there are far more than you would automatically expect. There are supporters of ours that own small corner shops or small businesses where they have the ability to make available to us sites that we could use for billboards. Of course, the cost of commercial billboarding is way beyond our reach, fantastically so. But I do think it is a very powerful advertising medium. As I drive into the RT building on a Sunday, now that there's virtually no traffic around, I see just how extraordinary is the power of these billboards. Some of them very beautiful and very creative and artistic also. So, you know, advertising works. That's why they spend so much money on it.
Thanks, George. And a question from Sammy McKenzie. What ways can we channel our party towards those disenfranchised with those who have left the Labour Party and other parties that are politically left-leaning and desire a new type of working class politics?
Well, of course, most of the people now joining us are people who were in the Labour Party. There's a mass exodus out of the Labour Party. It's a hemorrhage rather than everyone leaving at the same time. But over the last couple of months, the Labour Party has been hemorrhaging members, and that will go on for the rest of this year as Starmer, the full horror of Starmer becomes obvious. The brutal dispatching of the Labour Party's General Secretary, Jenny Formby. Jenny's undergoing chemotherapy. She's a cancer patient. But Sir Keir has nonetheless hounded her out of her job. The way in which the Labour Party is rigging the so-called investigation into the evidence which emerged, which horrified every Labour Party member with any decency, is obvious. They're going to blame the departing General Secretary, the cancer patient. They're going to blame her for the papers, the leaked Labour papers. And they're going to blame anyone who's left the premises. Seamus Milne, Jeremy Corbyn, they'll all be blamed for this. Talk about shooting the messenger. So that will lead to a still bigger hemorrhage. Some cling on with increasingly less persuasive arguments, like hang on till the NEC elections in the summer, like the NEC, which is already in the control of Keir Starmer, which was in any case in the control of the right, even when Jeremy Corbyn was the leader, because at least half of the so-called lefts on the NEC were actually on the right. Landsman was their leader, but he was by no means the only one. There were many who were elected on left-wing tickets. So that's not going to happen. Keir Starmer and the Blairites, who are now in charge of Labour, are never, ever going to relinquish that charge. There will be no more morons, to use their words, nominating, just for a laugh, just for the sake of the debate, a left-wing challenger for the Labour leader. As a matter of fact, the rules will be rigged that the Parliamentary Labour Party, through its control of the nominations process, will have absolute control over the election of a Labour leader. So any Labour leader who has the support of their MPs will continue as leader, just like before the democratisation of the party in the early 80s. So the NEC elections will come and go. Nothing will change. Starmer will be just as bad. So that hemorrhage will continue. Our appeal can't appeal to them all because some of them are liberals. Some of them are Trotskyites. Some of them are both at the same time, two sides of the same coin. We can't appeal to them. We don't want to. We don't want to appeal to them. But for decent working class socialists in the Labour Party, of whom there were and are a very substantial number, a six-figure number, we say that we represent what a Labour Party, a working class Labour Party should be. And you should join us, because staying in a party on the basis that you're going to fight your own party for the rest of your political life is the very definition of a waste of time. Trust me, I've been there and done it. It's bad for your soul. You've no idea how liberated I feel inside the Workers' Party. You could feel that way too.
Fantastic. And last question of the night comes from John Larkin. Go ahead, John.
George, can you hear me?
I can, John.
Oh, good. If we are going after the working class vote, as you said before, what ways can we encourage them to become politically active again in the wider context of voter apathy, post-Corbyn, etc., and the clear shortfalls of the mainstream media, which you've obviously eloquently mentioned? Secondly, linked to this question, do we think initiatives such as the Workers' Party Solidarity Fund can cut through the noise in the theatre to prove to working class voters that we are different and we will fight for them?
Yes, and you are a living example of a bus driver who stood up for their members, who was victimized by the company as a result, and therefore we have gained credit from you. Our people who are trade unionists have to be the best trade unionists. Those that are shop stewards have to be the best shop stewards. Those that are students in the universities have to be the best students. Those that are active on social media have to be the best on social media. Our cadre has to be impressive. They have to be the change that they want to build. People have to be able to look at them and say, well, that lad's from the Workers' Party, that woman is from the Workers' Party. See how she deals with her neighbours. See how he fights for his workmates and her workmates. See how they've studied the subjects that we're dealing with as students and so on. That's the very essence of our work. It was once upon a time, because these words I'm using to you now were taught to me by Michael McGahey, the former miners' leader in Scotland. They were taught to me by old communists. These were the rubrics of the way in which the Communist Party in Britain in the 1940s and 50s became big and powerful because they approached politics like that. I'm afraid to say that's all long gone, and they have virtually no influence anymore. But we are on the way up, and we are ready to learn from other people. And I feel sure that the fund that we've set up, thanks to you, we should really call it after you, we set this fund up so that we'll have some small means by which we can defend workers under attack. And by the way, for the rest of this year and well into next year, some of the biggest political issues in the country will be about defending workers who have been victimized for defending workers. It's happening already in Amazon. It's happened in your bus company. It will happen on the railways for sure. Happen in the postal service. That the people who stand up for the rights, for the safety, the lives of their workmates will be victimized by the employer. And the unions will have to step up to the plate and begin to do the job they're paid for. Because you're not paid, but you did a lot more for your workmates than official union structures, at least in the beginning, were prepared to do. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Some people don't like it. I'm amazed at how silent the unions are in this incredible, unprecedented period. Maybe they are saying things and I just don't hear it, in which case their communications are not very good. But if I was a trade union official, now, if I was the leader of a powerful trade union, I'd actually be forcing my way into the Channel 4 news studio. I'd actually have already set up my own radio and TV channel. I'd be taking this fight now into the public arena. But actually, with the exception of the RMT and the CWU, I actually don't hear anything at all from the unions, just at a time when they had the possibility to make themselves incredibly relevant and increasingly relevant. I just haven't heard from them. The health service unions, for example. Where are the health? I see hundreds of people, hundreds, fighting for the rights of health service workers online at this time. But I never see the health service unions. I never hear from them unless they've effectively blocked me and so I can not hear the wonderful songs that they're singing. But I doubt that. So more power to your elbow, John. You're not called Larkin for nothing. The great James Larkin, the leader of the Irish Transport and General Workers Union, was the man who coined the phrase, "It's better to die on your feet than to live forever on your knees." Thank you.
Fantastic way to end the evening. And it's been great to see these meetings growing and growing in terms of the members engaging and the viewers online. So just a shout out to everyone watching on Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. If you want to get involved, if you want to come and participate in these Workers' Party meetings, just go and sign up online, workerspartybritain.org. Come and sign up. We've made it as accessible as possible for everyone to get involved, come and have a say and help us build this thing and make a real difference in Britain. And don't forget to join us this Saturday at 8 p.m. to commemorate the great victory of the Soviet Union. And thanks again, George.
Thank you.